Emily Johnson scrubbed the marble countertop of the penthouse suite, the lemony scent of cleaning fluid mingling with the faint, sweet smell of luxury perfume still lingering in the air. The city skyline beyond the glass windows shimmered with the soft light of late afternoon, casting long shadows into the room. It was the kind of view she'd never get used to, not because it amazed her, but because it was so far removed from her own reality. In 2 years of working as a hotel cleaner, she had seen rooms that could fit her entire apartment inside their bathrooms. Yet, each time she stepped into these spaces, she felt invisible, a ghost gliding through a world she didn't belong to. The people who lived and stayed in these rooms probably didn't even know she existed, just a pair of hands tidying up after them. She paused for a moment, leaning against the counter to rub her aching lower back. It had been a long day, as always. Her feet throbbed from hours of moving from room to room, her fingers raw from scrubbing, wiping, and polishing. She checked the clock on her phone. Just a few more minutes, and she could clock out. Emily was a single mother in her 30s, raising her teenage daughter, Sarah, alone in a small, rent-controlled apartment. Every day was a struggle to balance the weight of bills, her daughter's education, and the never-ending grind of her job. She'd gotten used to it, though. After her husband, Mark, passed away in a factory accident years ago, she had learned to cope. Or at least she had tried. As she moved to the bedroom to smooth the sheets, a door down the hall clicked open, and muffled voices floated into the suite. Emily froze in place, her hand still gripping the corner of the bedspread. "Ryan, we need to be careful. One slip-up and everything's ruined," a woman's voice said, sharp and urgent. The name Ryan meant nothing to Emily, but the voice. It belonged to Amanda Davis, a regular guest at the hotel and the wife of one of the city's wealthiest businessmen, Daniel Davis. They stayed here often, especially before big business trips. Emily knew Amanda by the perfume she wore, a scent so expensive she could never pronounce its name. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively moved closer to the hallway, drawn by the tension in Amanda's tone. "I know, Amanda, but we need to stick to the plan. Everything depends on this trip." Ryan's voice was quieter, more cautious, but filled with an undercurrent of nervous energy. Emily couldn't see them from where she stood, but her pulse quickened as she strained to hear more. "What trip? What plan?" "I'm telling you," Amanda snapped. "If Daniel catches wind of anything, he's going to start asking questions. We can't afford any loose ends." There was a beat of silence, the air thick with tension. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should leave, pretend she hadn't heard anything. It wasn't her business. Rich people had secrets, sure, but it wasn't her place to get involved. Yet, her feet remained rooted to the floor, curiosity mixing with fear. "I'll make sure of it," Amanda continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "This will be his last trip." Emily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that rose in her throat. Her mind raced. Amanda's words didn't leave much to the imagination. The implication was clear. But what could she do? She was just the maid, someone who blended into the background. Who was she to interfere with the life of someone like Daniel Davis? She finished the bed with trembling hands, her mind whirling. As the voices faded, Emily could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. That night, Emily tossed and turned in her small, creaky bed. The conversation replayed in her mind, the weight of it pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was none of her business. But deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it. What if Daniel really was in danger? The following morning, Emily woke up bleary-eyed and anxious. As she made breakfast for Sarah, her thoughts kept circling back to the conversation she'd overheard. Every clink of the coffee cup, every sizzle of the frying pan was drowned out by Amanda's words, echoing in her mind. "This will be his last trip." "Mom, you okay?" Sarah asked from the kitchen table, eyeing her mother with concern. Emily forced a smile. "Yeah, honey. Just tired, that's all." But she wasn't okay. As the day dragged on, the weight of what she'd heard became unbearable. She had to make a choice. Should she go to the police? But what could she tell them? That she overheard something vague and potentially dangerous between two high-society elites? She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts as she finished her shift later that day. The smell of cleaning supplies lingered on her hands even after she scrubbed them clean. But the memories of that conversation wouldn't wash away. On her way out of the hotel, she glanced at the front desk where Daniel Davis often stood, waiting for his wife to finish some business call or event. He was there now, reading something on his phone, looking relaxed, completely unaware of the danger that could be awaiting him. Emily's stomach twisted in knots. What if she did nothing and something terrible happened? What if he went on that trip, unaware that his wife was planning something sinister? She thought about Mark, how she had never gotten closure after his accident. No one had fought for him, and she'd been too devastated to demand answers. This time, she couldn't stand by and do nothing. Before she could second-guess herself, Emily marched toward Daniel. Her heart hammered in her chest as she approached him. He glanced up, his eyes flicking over her with mild curiosity. "Excuse me, Mr. Davis?" Emily's voice came out quieter than she intended, but she pressed on. Daniel lowered his phone and gave her a polite smile. "Yes?" She hesitated. What was she thinking? How would this look? A hotel maid walking up to a millionaire, warning him about his own wife. She gripped her hands together tightly, trying to steady her nerves. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice firmer now. "Please don't go on your trip." Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "What? Why?" Emily swallowed, her mouth dry. She couldn't explain everything, not without sounding completely crazy. "I overheard something, and I can't say much, but I'm begging you, don't go. It's dangerous." For a moment, Daniel just stared at her, confused and probably wondering if she was out of her mind. But there was something in her tone, something desperate, that seemed to make him pause. His brow furrowed, as if he were weighing her words carefully. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more serious. Emily nodded. "Please just trust me." Daniel glanced around the lobby, clearly trying to make sense of what was happening. Finally, he let out a small sigh, pocketing his phone. "I'll think about it," he said, his tone non-committal. "Thanks for the warning." Emily nodded, biting her lip as she stepped back, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. As she walked away, she felt a mix of relief and dread. Would he listen? Would she regret getting involved? Only time would tell. The next morning, Emily stepped outside her building and froze. Parked right in front of her modest apartment was a sleek black luxury car, the kind of car that didn't belong in her neighborhood of old brick buildings and cracked sidewalks. It gleamed under the morning sun, an obvious beacon of wealth that felt out of place. Her stomach twisted with nerves. Who would be driving a car like that here? And more importantly, who were they waiting for? As if on cue, the driver, dressed in a sharp black suit, stepped out and approached her. He held a crisp white envelope in his hand, extending it toward her without a word. Emily stared at the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she took it. The driver offered a polite nod before turning back to the car and driving away, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her heart pounding in her chest. She slowly opened the envelope, her fingers fumbling with the smooth paper. Inside was a single key attached to a silver keychain engraved with 2 words, Wilshire Towers. Beneath the key was a small note. "Your new place is ready. Welcome to a fresh start. Daniel Davis." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Wilshire Towers was one of the most upscale apartment buildings downtown. It was far beyond anything she could ever afford. But why was Daniel giving this to her? What was the catch? Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "Your new home awaits." Emily's mind raced. Was this real? What had she gotten herself into? Emily stepped into Wilshire Towers for the first time later that afternoon, feeling completely out of place. The lobby was pristine, marble floors gleaming under the soft glow of expensive chandeliers. A doorman greeted her with a polite nod, as if people like her walked through these doors every day. But Emily felt like an imposter. She handed the doorman the key with a shaky hand. He typed something into the security system before handing it back to her. "You're all set, Ms. Johnson. Elevator to your right, 15th floor." Emily mumbled her thanks, stepping into the elevator with a nervous flutter in her chest. The ride up felt like forever, each passing floor making her feel more and more detached from her old life. When the elevator doors finally slid open, she found herself facing a sleek modern hallway that stretched in either direction, with doors spaced far apart, just like in the hotel, but quieter, more isolated. Her new apartment was at the far end. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers, stepping inside to find a stunning, fully furnished space. The living room was immaculate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything was perfect, from the minimalist decor to the polished kitchen. It felt surreal, like she had walked into someone else's life. But as much as she wanted to enjoy it, unease gnawed at her. She hadn't asked for this. And what would Daniel expect in return? As Emily sat down on the plush couch, her phone buzzed again. It was another message from the unknown number. Emily couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest as she reread the message. "We need to talk." She knew it was from Daniel. What did he want? Why had he given her this apartment, this key to a new life? And what was he expecting in return? The next day, Daniel invited her to meet him at a quiet cafe downtown, far from the hotel where they had first crossed paths. When she arrived, she spotted him immediately. He was seated at a corner table, dressed in a casual suit, looking out of place amid the simple decor. His expression was pensive, as if something heavy weighed on his mind. Emily approached him cautiously. "Mr. Davis," she greeted. "Please call me Daniel," he replied with a small, tired smile, gesturing for her to sit. Once she sat down, silence hung between them for a moment before Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You probably want to know why I gave you the apartment." Emily nodded, though in truth, her mind was racing with more than just that question. She wanted to know why she had overheard what she had, what Amanda had planned, why Daniel seemed to be caught in the middle of something dangerous. "I owe you," he began. "After what you said, I canceled the trip. And, well, I started looking into things. You were right, Emily. There's something off, something Amanda's involved in that I didn't see coming." Emily's pulse quickened. "What kind of thing? You mean, about the trip?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's more than that. I didn't want to believe it at first, but Amanda, she's not just planning a business trip for me. There's a deeper plan, one I wasn't supposed to survive." Emily swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Amanda has been making deals behind my back. Shady deals. Things that could ruin me. And she's been working with Ryan, someone I thought I could trust. They're setting things up, slowly cutting me out, so when I'm out of the picture, they'll take everything." The realization hit Emily like a cold wave. "That's why she said it would be your last trip." Daniel nodded grimly. "Yes, I didn't want to believe it at first, but I did some digging. Amanda and Ryan are trying to push me out of my own company. Worse, they've been covering up illegal deals that could send all of us to prison." Emily's head spun. Amanda was orchestrating something much larger than just sabotaging a business trip. She was aiming to destroy Daniel entirely, and possibly his life. But then, something else gnawed at Emily's mind. "And what about my father?" Daniel hesitated. He took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "That's the part I didn't know until recently. I found out that Amanda's father had connections to certain people involved in a lot of dangerous activities. Some of them tied to city construction projects, including where your father worked. That accident, I don't think it was an accident, Emily." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her father's death, which had haunted her for years, suddenly took on a new, chilling meaning. She'd always had questions. Why the factory was so poorly maintained. Why no one took responsibility. But she had never imagined Amanda's family could be involved. "What do you mean?" she whispered, feeling her hands shake. Daniel met her gaze, his expression somber. "Your father was a witness to something. Something they couldn't afford to let out. He knew too much. And Amanda's family made sure he wouldn't talk." Emily sat back in her chair, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. All this time, she had thought her father had been a victim of negligence, a tragic workplace accident. But now it seemed that his death had been part of a much darker conspiracy. After their conversation, Daniel insisted on introducing Emily to Detective Mark Martinez, a seasoned NYPD officer who had been investigating Amanda's father and his shady connections for years. Martinez had tried to build a case against the Davis family, but their wealth and influence had kept them protected. Now, with Daniel's cooperation, Martinez was eager to see justice done. Emily met Martinez in his small, cluttered office at the precinct. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and paper. Martinez, a tall man with a gruff demeanor, greeted her with a nod as Daniel introduced them. "Emily, I've been looking into your father's case," Martinez began, flipping through a file. "His death was ruled an accident back then, but I've always had my doubts. There were too many loose ends, and the factory had some connections to Amanda's family that no one bothered to investigate." Emily's stomach churned. "Do you think Amanda's father had something to do with it?" Martinez nodded grimly. "It's possible. We don't have hard evidence yet, but your father might have been a loose end they needed to tie up. He wasn't just any worker, he knew things. And now that we're looking deeper into Amanda's dealings, I wouldn't be surprised if her family was involved." Emily's hands tightened into fists. All these years, she had grieved for her father, never knowing the full story. But now that she did, she wasn't sure how to process the rage, the grief, and the sense of betrayal coursing through her. "I want justice," she said, her voice steely, "for my father." Martinez met her eyes. "We'll get it. But you need to be careful, Emily. Amanda's family is powerful. They don't play by the rules, and they've kept a lot of people quiet with their money and influence." Emily nodded, though her heart pounded with fear. The weight of what she was getting involved in pressed heavily on her. She knew Amanda wouldn't take kindly to someone like her trying to dig into the family's secrets. Still, she couldn't back down now, not after learning the truth. Over the next few days, Emily worked closely with Daniel and Detective Martinez to uncover more about Amanda's plans and the illegal dealings connected to her father's death. But the deeper they dug, the more dangerous things became. Emily started noticing strange cars parked near her apartment, and Sarah, her daughter, mentioned odd men who seemed to be watching them when they went to school. Tension rose as the threats became more real. Emily's anxiety for Sarah's safety grew. One afternoon, Sarah came home from school visibly upset. She dropped her backpack on the floor, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, some girls at school were saying stuff about us," she said, her voice trembling. "They said we don't belong here, that we're just poor people living in someone else's neighborhood." Emily's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's distress. She hugged Sarah tightly, trying to soothe her. But deep down, she knew this was just another tactic, an attempt to isolate them, make them feel out of place. The racist and classist undertones of those comments mirrored Amanda's attitude perfectly. For Amanda, people like Emily and Sarah were just part of the background, not worth considering unless they became a threat. And now, Emily was a threat. Amanda knew it. 1 week after meeting with Martinez, Emily thought she saw a flicker of hope. Daniel had managed to gather some documents linking Amanda to several illegal business deals, including some involving the factory where Emily's father worked. They were starting to build a solid case. Martinez, too, was hopeful that they could finally expose Amanda's schemes. For a brief moment, things seemed calm. Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and Sarah could have a normal life again. But that hope was short-lived. Late one night, as Emily was preparing to go to bed, her phone buzzed. She frowned, picking it up. The screen flashed with a message from an unknown number. "You're in over your head. Back off, or you'll regret it." Emily's blood ran cold. Her fingers shook as she stared at the message. Her worst fears were coming true. Amanda knew what they were doing, and she wasn't going to let it slide. This was her warning, and it sent a chill down Emily's spine. As if on cue, the phone rang. Emily hesitated before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello? Emily!" A familiar voice purred on the other end of the line. It was Amanda. Her tone was smooth, but underneath, there was a cold edge. "You think you're clever, don't you? But let me tell you something. People like you don't mess with people like me and get away with it." Emily swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you want, Amanda?" Amanda's laugh was soft, but filled with malice. "I want you to remember your place. I don't care what you think you've uncovered. But if you keep pushing, I'll make sure you and your daughter pay for it. Is that clear?" Emily's pulse quickened, fear creeping into her chest. She tried to steady her voice. "You can't scare me into silence." "Oh, Emily," Amanda said, her voice dripping with venom. "You're already scared. You just don't know how bad it's going to get yet." The line went dead before Emily could respond, leaving her standing in the middle of her living room, her heart racing and her palms clammy. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing. Amanda wasn't bluffing. She had the power and the resources to make good on her threats. The next morning, Emily woke up to find another message waiting on her phone. "This is your last warning." Emily's fear reached a breaking point as the threats from Amanda became more real. Sarah began receiving harassing comments at school, and Emily knew Amanda's reach extended far beyond the luxurious walls of her apartment. But instead of giving in, Emily's resolve hardened. She couldn't let Amanda scare her into submission. She had to see this through, for her father, for Sarah, and for herself. She met with Daniel and Martinez in secret, and they agreed. They were close to exposing Amanda, but they had to move quickly. The only way to ensure Amanda couldn't slip away was to confront Ryan, Amanda's partner in the scheme. Ryan had been complicit in Amanda's plans, but there were signs he was starting to crack under the pressure. "We need to get Ryan to talk," Martinez said, his voice firm. "He's our best chance at getting Amanda convicted. But he's slippery. We need to act fast before he disappears." Emily and Daniel agreed to meet Ryan that night at a bar he frequented downtown. It was a risky plan, but if they could get him to cooperate, they'd have enough evidence to bring Amanda down. As they waited for Ryan to arrive, Emily's nerves were on edge. The weight of the past weeks pressed down on her. Her father's death, the threats, Sarah's struggles. It all felt like too much. But she reminded herself that she was doing this for a reason. This was her chance to finally uncover the truth. When Ryan finally walked into the bar, Emily saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He knew something was up. He sat down across from them, his expression guarded. "You're in deep, Ryan," Daniel said quietly, leaning forward. "But it doesn't have to end badly for you. Help us bring Amanda down, and we can protect you." Ryan's jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room. For a moment, Emily thought he might run. But then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll help you," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But if Amanda finds out—" "She won't," Emily said, her voice steady. "We're going to take her down before she can." But deep down, Emily knew Amanda was always a step ahead. And the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous this game would become. Ryan's cooperation was the break they needed, but Emily couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her. They had crossed a line now. There was no turning back. Amanda wasn't just going to sit idly by while they exposed her plans. As they left the bar after their secret meeting, Emily's heart pounded, her mind racing with everything that was at stake. Amanda had made it clear she wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened her power. And Emily knew that included her and Sarah. Later that night, Emily, Daniel, and Detective Martinez gathered at Daniel's penthouse to finalize their plan. The tension in the room was thick as they reviewed the documents Ryan had provided. The evidence was damning. Financial records, emails, and contracts that tied Amanda to illegal dealings, money laundering, and the factory where Emily's father had worked. With this information, they could take Amanda down for good. "We need to release this carefully," Martinez said, spreading the documents across the table. "If Amanda gets wind of this before we're ready, she'll bury us. She's got powerful connections. We need to make sure the evidence is undeniable and public before she can react." Emily felt a knot in her stomach tighten. And what about Sarah? Amanda's already been sending threats. Martinez looked at her sympathetically. "We'll put a protection detail on you and Sarah, but we have to move quickly. The more time that passes, the more Amanda can manipulate the situation." Daniel, who had been unusually quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "We'll need to do this in a way that catches Amanda off guard. If she even suspects we're coming for her, she'll use her resources to shut everything down." Emily glanced at Daniel, sensing the weight of his words. Despite their alliance, she knew how conflicted he must be. Amanda was still his wife, after all, and though their marriage had been crumbling under the weight of lies and betrayal, taking her down was going to change his life forever. "I'm in," Daniel said, as if reading Emily's thoughts. "This has to end." They agreed to proceed in 2 days, with Ryan providing his testimony directly to Martinez. Once they had his statement and the documents on record, they would confront Amanda and release the information to the authorities and the media at the same time, ensuring she had no room to hide. That night, Emily returned to her new apartment, staring out the window at the city below. The apartment, luxurious and filled with things she could never have dreamed of, now felt like a prison. She knew she had to act, but the fear that gripped her was suffocating. Amanda's threat still echoed in her ears. "People like you don't mess with people like me and get away with it." She thought of Sarah, asleep in the next room, unaware of the danger surrounding them. This wasn't just about exposing Amanda anymore. It was about survival. 2 days later, the plan was in motion. Emily's nerves were on edge as she made her way to the police station with Daniel and Martinez. They were meeting Ryan there, who had promised to give a full statement about Amanda's illegal activities and her involvement in Emily's father's death. This was the key to everything. As they walked into the station, the atmosphere felt charged, as if they were on the brink of something monumental. Martinez led them through the bustling precinct to a small private interrogation room where Ryan was already waiting. He looked pale, his eyes flicking nervously toward the door as if expecting Amanda to burst in at any moment. "Are you ready?" Martinez asked him, his voice steady. Ryan nodded, though his hands trembled as he clutched the file of documents he had brought with him. "I don't have a choice, do I?" Emily sat across from him, her heart pounding. "You're doing the right thing, Ryan," she said softly, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Ryan had been complicit in Amanda's schemes for years. He had stood by while Amanda manipulated people, lied, and destroyed lives. But now, he was their only chance at justice. Ryan's statement was long and detailed, and each word felt like another step closer to the truth. He revealed how Amanda had gradually taken control of Daniel's company, using their business trips as cover for shady deals. He also confirmed what Emily had feared most. Amanda's father had orchestrated her own father's death to cover up his illegal operations at the factory. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Ryan spoke about the factory explosion that had killed her father. "He wasn't supposed to die," Ryan said, his voice strained, "but he found out about the money being funneled into the construction projects. He was going to blow the whistle. Amanda's father. He couldn't let that happen." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing herself to stay strong. This was the truth she had been searching for all these years, and though it hurt more than she could have imagined, it was also liberating. Her father hadn't died in vain. He had been fighting for what was right, and now it was up to her to finish what he started. Once Ryan's statement was recorded, Martinez wasted no time. "I'm putting this on record now," he said, standing up. "We'll move on Amanda tonight." Emily felt a wave of relief and fear wash over her. It was happening. The end was in sight. But as they left the police station that night, things quickly took a dangerous turn. Emily, Daniel, and Ryan were walking toward the parking lot when they noticed something strange. A sleek black car parked at the far end of the lot, its engine idling. Emily's stomach churned. She recognized that car. Before she could say anything, the car's door swung open and Amanda stepped out. Her expression was calm, too calm, and her eyes glittered with cold calculation as she approached them. "Well, well," Amanda said, her voice smooth as silk. "I thought I'd find you all here." Emily's heart raced. How had Amanda known they'd be at the police station? How did she know they were planning to expose her? Ryan took a step back, his face pale. "Amanda, you think you're clever?" Amanda cut him off, her tone icy. "You think you can betray me and just walk away?" Emily's pulse quickened, her mind racing. How had Amanda found out about their plan? Who had told her? Then, with a sickening realization, she glanced at Ryan. His eyes were wide with fear, his hands trembling. "You told her," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You betrayed us." Ryan looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. "I didn't want to," he muttered. "But she knew. She was always watching. I couldn't—" "You coward!" Daniel hissed, stepping forward, his fists clenched. "You could have stopped this." But before any of them could react further, Amanda took another step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Ryan's not the only one who should be afraid," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You think you can take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew Amanda was right. Amanda's family had deep ties to powerful people, and she had no qualms about using those connections to protect herself. But they had come too far to back down now. "I don't care who you are," Emily said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're not going to get away with this." Amanda's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see." Without another word, Amanda turned and got back into her car, speeding off into the night. Emily stood there, her body trembling with a mix of fear and anger. Ryan had betrayed them, and now Amanda knew everything. The entire plan was falling apart, and the clock was ticking. Daniel turned to Emily, his face grim. "We need to move fast. Martinez has the statement, but if Amanda knows we're onto her, she'll disappear before the authorities can act." Emily nodded, her mind racing. They had to act, and they had to act now. The cold, crisp night air hit Emily like a slap to the face as she and Daniel raced out of the police station. There was no time to process Ryan's betrayal. They had to act before Amanda could make her move. She was always a step ahead, but this time Emily and Daniel couldn't afford to let her win. The evidence they had gathered was solid, but now that Amanda knew, they had to go public before she could use her connections to bury it. Daniel drove them back to his penthouse in tense silence. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes focused straight ahead. Emily could feel the weight of everything pressing down on them: her father's death, the years of deception, and now the looming threat of Amanda striking back. But as they neared Daniel's building, a sudden realization hit Emily. What if she's already moving to disappear? Emily's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Daniel glanced at her, his jaw clenched. "We're not going to let that happen. I've called Martinez. He's pulling every string he has to make sure she can't get out of the city." Emily nodded, but fear still gnawed at her. Amanda was ruthless, and the more desperate she became, the more dangerous she would be. They pulled into the underground parking garage, and as Daniel parked the car, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, but she already knew who it was from. "You think you can run? This isn't over." Emily's hands shook as she read the message. Amanda wasn't just playing mind games anymore. This was a direct threat. She showed the message to Daniel, who cursed under his breath. "We need to move faster," he muttered, pushing open the car door. "We can't wait for Martinez to handle this." Emily followed him up to his apartment, her heart pounding. They had to act quickly, but how? Amanda had already shown that she had eyes everywhere, even within their closest circles. Who could they trust? As they stepped into the penthouse, Emily's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Detective Martinez. "Emily! Daniel?" Martinez's voice was urgent on the other end of the line. "We have a problem. I just got word that Amanda's father has been pulling strings behind the scenes. They're trying to expedite some of the deals she's involved in, and if she disappears, they'll close everything down before we can act." Emily's heart sank. Amanda wasn't just planning to disappear. She was going to finalize her illegal dealings before anyone could stop her. And once those deals were closed, the evidence they had gathered would be useless. "What do we do?" Emily asked, her voice tight with fear. "We need to confront her directly," Martinez replied. "I know it's risky, but we have to catch her before she makes her move. She's already too far ahead, and we can't wait for the courts to catch up. I'll meet you at her family estate." The weight of Martinez's words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. Confronting Amanda directly was dangerous, more dangerous than anything they'd done so far. But there was no other choice. Amanda wasn't going to stop until she had silenced them for good. Emily's hands trembled as they approached Amanda's family estate later that night. The old mansion loomed in the distance, its tall iron gates slightly ajar, as if no one had cared to lock them. Overgrown vines snaked their way up the stone walls, giving the place an eerie, forgotten feel, but Emily knew better. Amanda was inside, waiting. She had been preparing for this moment longer than any of them realized. Martinez had briefed them on the way over, telling them that the only way to ensure Amanda couldn't disappear was to publicly confront her. The media had already been tipped off. Journalists were waiting just outside the perimeter, ready to expose the truth as soon as the confrontation unfolded. As they reached the front door, Daniel glanced at Emily, his face pale but determined. "Are you ready?" Emily nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. They didn't have much time, and every second counted. Martinez led the way into the mansion, his gun holstered but ready, just in case things went south. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet. The polished floors and grand chandeliers made the space feel even more oppressive, like a tomb for the secrets Amanda's family had been hiding for years. They moved through the hallways quickly, making their way toward the study where they knew Amanda would be. When they finally reached the study, Emily's pulse quickened. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Amanda sat behind a large, ornate desk. She didn't look surprised to see them. In fact, she looked almost amused. "Well," Amanda said, her voice smooth and cold, "it seems my little game has caught your attention." Emily stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "It's over, Amanda. We know everything." Amanda raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "Do you? Do you really think you can stop this? My family has been controlling this city for years. You think a few documents and a couple of threats are going to change that?" Emily's breath caught in her throat, but she stood her ground. "We have the media outside. They're waiting for the story. You can't bury this anymore." Amanda's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of fear in them. She stood up from the desk, her hands resting on the edge as she leaned forward. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you?" Just then, Daniel stepped forward, his voice cold and steady. "I know exactly what we're dealing with, and I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Amanda's gaze flicked to Daniel, and for a moment, something almost like sadness passed across her face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual icy demeanor. "You always were weak, Daniel," Amanda said, her tone mocking. "You never had the stomach for this kind of power." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he pulled a file from his jacket and dropped it on the desk in front of Amanda. "It's over," he said simply. "The police have everything?" Amanda's smirk faltered, and Emily felt a surge of satisfaction. For the first time, Amanda was realizing that her reign of control was crumbling. But Emily also knew that Amanda wasn't the type to go down without a fight. "You're going to regret this," Amanda said, her voice low and venomous. "All of you." But just as Amanda reached for the file, Martinez stepped forward, holding up his hand. "That's enough, Amanda. You're under arrest." For a moment, it seemed as if Amanda was going to resist. Her eyes flicked toward the door, as if calculating her escape route. But Martinez was faster. He moved toward her, placing her in handcuffs before she could make a move. As Martinez led Amanda out of the study, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. Amanda's control, her manipulation, her lies, it was all finally coming to an end. But as they walked out of the mansion and into the waiting crowd of reporters, Emily knew that this was just the beginning. The reporters swarmed around them, microphones flashing as they bombarded them with questions. Emily stayed close to Daniel, feeling overwhelmed by the chaos. But through it all, she felt a sense of closure. She had finally uncovered the truth about her father's death, and Amanda was going to pay for everything she had done. In the weeks following Amanda's arrest, Emily's life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy had died down, but the story of Amanda's fall from grace was still making headlines. Every day, there were new articles about the illegal dealings, the money laundering, and the corruption that had plagued the city for years. And through it all, Emily was finally starting to heal. Sarah had returned to school, and though things were still tense at times, the weight of Amanda's threats no longer hung over them. Emily had moved back into her modest apartment, though Daniel had insisted on helping her financially. It was a gesture she had initially resisted. But Daniel had made it clear that it wasn't charity. It was reparations for everything Amanda had taken from her. One afternoon, as Emily sat at her kitchen table sipping a cup of coffee, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I have something to show you. Can you meet me at the cafe?" "Curious," Emily replied, and quickly made her way to the small cafe where they had met so many times before. When she arrived, Daniel was already seated at their usual table, a file in front of him. "Hey," Emily greeted, sitting down across from him. "What's this?" Daniel smiled faintly and slid the file toward her. "It's something I've been working on. I think you'll want to see it." Emily opened the file, her eyes scanning the documents inside. It was an official report, detailing the investigation into her father's death. But this time, the report didn't label it as an accident. It labeled it as murder. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the final lines of the report. Thomas Johnson was targeted due to his knowledge of illegal operations conduit, CTED by Amanda Davis's father. His death was orchestrated to prevent him from exposing the truth. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "After all these years—" Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand gently. "Your father's name is cleared, Emily. He fought for the truth, and now everyone knows it." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and grief. She had spent so many years searching for answers, and now that she had them, she wasn't sure what to do next. But one thing was certain. Her father's legacy was finally vindicated. As they sat together in the cafe, Emily felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. The truth was out, and Amanda was behind bars. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, Emily could see a future that wasn't clouded by fear and uncertainty. She smiled at Daniel, grateful for everything he had done to help her. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. Daniel shrugged, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Maybe, but you're the one who stepped up. You're the one who found the courage to uncover the truth." Emily's smile grew, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt ready to move forward. She had faced down her past, exposed the lies that had controlled her life, and brought justice to her father's memory. Now it was time to embrace the future, one filled with hope, peace, and the knowledge that she had fought for what was right. Months later, Emily stood at her father's grave, a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. The wind rustled through the trees, the autumn air crisp and clean. She knelt down, placing the flowers gently on the grave, and for a moment she let herself feel the weight of everything that had happened. "I did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I finally found the truth." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, tears that came from knowing her father's legacy had been restored. Amanda was in prison. Her empire of lies crumbled, and the truth had come to light. As Emily stood up, she glanced over at Sarah, who was waiting for her by the car. Her daughter smiled, waving her over, and Emily smiled back. She had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for Sarah, for the future they both deserved. With one last look at her father's grave, Emily turned and walked toward the car, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead.